Welcome to the Ford Library. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Elaine Didier, and it's my privilege to serve as the director of both the library here in Ann Arbor and the museum in Grand Rapids. We are especially pleased to see you tonight for this first program of 2019. Tonight's program is brought to you by our parent organization, the National Archives and Records Administration, and also the Ford Presidential Foundation. And in addition tonight, special sponsorship and hosting by Albion College. We're very, very pleased to have Albion be so kind as to bring this program to us. So we thank all of these entities and especially the Friends of Ford and donors to the foundation who make possible all of our exhibits and public programs. Now, I mentioned Albion College, and to have the honors to introduce our speaker, Albion is hosting Peter Hart this week, and Patrick McLean was kind enough to call me at the end of January, just before the shutdown ended, and I was in this awkward position to say, yes, thank you, we'd love to share your speaker, but I can't make a commitment until I know if we're in business. So he hung on and waited for us a couple of days for things to settle. So please welcome Patrick McLean.
Thank you, Elaine, and good evening. I'm Patrick McLean, Director of the Gerald R. Ford Institute for Leadership and Public Policy and Service at Albion College. The Ford Institute at Albion trains undergrads, like several of my students who are here somewhere. There they are. Trains them to be the next generation of public servants, really in the great tradition of the namesake that we share in common with this fine institution and the University of Michigan. President Ford was a member of Albion's Board of Trustees back in the 1960s while he was in Congress, and he founded our institute in 1977. His pollster, Bob Teeter, was an Albion alumnus, and that connection really is what brings us here tonight. He was also Peter Hart's friend, and so therein lies the linkage. Peter Hart is regarded as one of the top analysts of public opinion in the United States. He's a leading shaper of national trends and political messages. He founded Hart Research in 1971, and since 1989 has been the pollster for NBC News and the Wall Street Journal. His political clients have included leaders in the forefront of American politics over the past half-century, from leaders like Hubert Humphrey and Jay Rockefeller to Edward Kennedy and Bill Clinton. He has represented more than 55 senators and 40 governors. His work with Hart Research has focused on public opinion, public policy, and cultural issues, and has included also work for clients such as the Smithsonian Institution, Habitat for Humanity, UNICEF, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In the international realm, he has conducted studies in South America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. There's not much left. He's conducted strategy planning projects for clients such as Coca-Cola, AT&T, and Tiffany & Company. The National Journal named Peter as one of its 150 national leaders who shaped federal government policy. Sometimes called the dean of this generation of pollsters, he's covered election night news for either NBC or CBS since 1964. In 2002, Peter was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award for outstanding contribution to campaign consulting by the American University's Campaign Management Institute. Peter's been acknowledged by the leaders in the field as one of the most astute observers of public attitudes in politics and consumer attitudes. David Brooks, New York Times, called him the Uber pollster, and Albert Hunt of Bloomberg referred to the NBC News Wall Street Journal poll as the gold standard in public polling. Peter has appeared on Meet the Press, The Today Show, and Rock Center with Brian Williams. For the past 30 years, he's been a Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellow, and I'm pleased to say for this last week, the Visiting Fellowship has been here at Albion College. Thank you, Peter. Finally, Peter is the grandfather of Will and Abby. Lindy, I told you I would say that. And, perhaps as important as anything I'll mention tonight, he's the founder of the annual Hart Research NCAA pool, now in its 31st year. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Hart.
I am delighted to be here, and I thank you, and so honored, because Bob Teeter was indeed my colleague and my partner in the NBC Wall Street Journal poll. And he obviously had a great affinity for this institution as well as Albion, but particularly for Gerald Ford, who he polled for in the 1976 election. Bob, for those of you who may not have known him, was one of the truly special, whoops, are we?
Yeah, we hit something.
Uh-oh. You know, they invited me here for my technical skills. And within no time at all, I've screwed up every system. Okay, what can I do and can't I do? Don't touch anything. Okay. Okay, thank you. Bob Teeter was indeed my friend and really one of the outstanding pollsters. This is a person who truly understood and knew how to measure American public opinion. And as a colleague, he was a Republican, I was a Democrat. We worked together on the NBC Wall Street Journal poll. And all I can tell you is that we had a friendship that was built upon a personal relationship of trust, but also a relationship of respect. And I cannot tell you how much I miss Bob and how special he was in my life. So I'm here at Michigan and at Albion in order to honor my very good friend. I am delighted to be here and to talk about public opinion and where I see things at this stage. I have to start, though, with one story because Patrick introduced me. You know, I've been teaching at various colleges, and I was teaching at the University of Pennsylvania in 2009. And a young co-ed after my first class came running up to me, and she said, "You've got to tell me the most exciting election you've ever been in. Was it Obama? Was it Kennedy? Or was it Roosevelt?" I said, "Roosevelt? I wasn't even barely alive for Roosevelt." And she said, "No, no, no, I meant Franklin, not Teddy." So, you know, no matter how hard you boo, it won't affect me. I have to say the other thing is I fell into politics. I went to work for Lou Harris in 1964, who had been John F. Kennedy's pollster. And when I got engaged to my marvelous wife of 45 years, Florence Hart, she phoned her uncle, who was a rabbi, to announce that we were getting engaged and to be married. And the rabbi said to him, "And what does the young man do?" And she said, "Oh, he's a pollster." And the rabbi said, "Oh, there's so much work in couches and chairs. He'll do great." So, excuse me if I lapse into couches and chairs, but we'll do a little of that. Let me start. I want to do two things tonight. One, I want to talk about sort of my lessons over a 55-year career of things that I've learned, which I think pertain to 2020. And then the second thing I want to do is talk a little bit about the 2020 election from where things are today. So I've got to start. Look at the results. Who got it right? You look like you're close. Who got the election right in 2016? Who would you say? One of these polls must have. How many say, let's face it, the LA Times got it right? How many say, right? Okay. So why are they right? Because Trump won the election, right? Yeah. How many agree with that? Ah, you're wrong. Who won the election? We measure the popular vote. We don't measure the electoral vote.
Well, apparently that's what we decided by.
Yeah, oh, sure. We got a heckler in the front row right to begin with. Oh, thanks a lot. In any respect, the point here is, if you look, everybody said the polls got it wrong. Those polls, particularly the LA Times, got it most wrong because essentially, no, Donald Trump didn't win. The polls that had Hillary Clinton were closer to correct. Now, that's part of what people don't understand about polling, but more importantly, I think we were wrong, and I'll take the heat because I think we analyzed it badly. So I'm going to take you through a couple of these. And one of the mistakes we made is overlooking something that was very important and was sitting right in front of us. There were about 1 in 5 voters in America who did not like either candidate. And essentially, at the very beginning in June, they were voting for Johnson and Stein as a way of saying, I can't vote for either Trump or Clinton. And as we went along through the summer, it remained evenly divided, with them both getting about 15, 20%, whatever it was. But look what happened in September. All of a sudden, these people started turning towards Donald Trump, and they stayed that way all the way to the end, where they actually voted 47-30. So that what we missed as pollsters, and I'll take my rap right here, is that we overlooked people who had negative views towards both of them. And what they were doing is they were really voting on Hillary Clinton. They said, I can't stand her, so I'm going to look at the alternative. And in the end, on election night, the exit polls showed you by 47-30, they voted for Donald Trump. So Hillary Clinton was really the pivot point for many voters. The second thing that we missed is what happened right here in Michigan and happened in what we call the Rust Belt. And what happened in the Rust Belt, as much as anything else, I was blocking your view. You know, I told you to buy that better seat over here in any respect. So what was happening here is that the Rust Belt, for all the years we've done the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, has never analyzed it by anything other than East, South, Midwest, or West. But the Rust Belt covers both the East and the Midwest. So we never broke this out. And what was happening is, look at what happened with Hillary Clinton. Throughout this period, in those 4 states, essentially negative views towards her. Never at one stage, except for that little period in February of 15, did these people have a positive point of view. But most important, look at this. They went from 49 to 56% negative in the end of the campaign. Look at Donald Trump. They never liked Donald Trump. But look what happened. His negative went down. And if we'd been watching that, we probably would have picked up the fact that, uh-oh, there's trouble right here. And actually, we did some polling, and we found in Michigan, 1 week before the election, that Hillary Clinton was ahead by 1 point. So we knew there was trouble brewing in Michigan. But those were the errors, and errors to learn from. Let me tell you another thing I've learned over a period of time. I started my career with Lou Harris in 1964. 1964, Lyndon Johnson won a massive landslide over Barry Goldwater. But during the middle of that campaign, there were 3 major events that happened. First of all, Khrushchev was deposed. China did the H-bomb testing, and one other thing, Walter Jenkins, an aide to Lyndon Johnson, was caught in a morality problem. Lou Harris said, this is the most significant thing. This is going to change the election and turn it upside down. And in rapid speed, we went out in 8 days and got the results. 8 days, those were the old days. We were in horse and buggy carriages there, but we moved very quickly. And what we found out is attitudes didn't change 1 iota, not 1 iota. People had reached their point of view and everything happened. I relearned the lesson in 2016. Okay? We had Bernie, we had Donald Trump, And how many remember? Who's this family? And what do we remember about them? What? His son was killed. And what did Donald Trump do? Defamed him. Okay? And you would say, that's going to turn the election. That's going to make a difference. And when you go back and you look, there wasn't a blip of movement over that. Nor were there a blip of movement on most things that happened. And the lesson you should learn for 2020 and 2019 is just because an event seems like the most important thing to you or somebody else, in reality, it's really not that much change. So don't overreact. And you look at this. Next thing, changing polling methodology. When I entered, we did all of our polls door to door. So we interviewed you face to face, and we knew what you were thinking and where things were at. In late 1970, we switched to telephone polling, and people said, that's the end of polling. Polling will never work, et cetera. And people started writing, more pollsters than ever. This is the worst thing that'll ever happen. Oh my God, having all these numbers floating around. Let me just tell you, if this is going to be a repeat of 1948, it's the end of the world. And, flood of polls show that no sign of abating, et cetera. Well, thank God for me, they continue to move forward. I've been making money hand over fist, and I want to thank you guys in any respect. But what happened in polling? Polling adjusted, and we used telephone, and we've been using cell phones, and we've been interviewing people, and all of the same thing, polling industry. We are now looking forward to 2020. We are getting online polls and their concerns, and we're getting the same thing. Look at this, it's not going to be the same, it's the end of the world, et cetera. Polarized polls, internet versus the phone. And Pew Research, which is doing the best work in public opinion, has now started moving towards online interviewing. There are lots of problems, there are difficulties, but like everything else, what polling cares about is, can you do it fast and can you do it cheap? This is going to be faster and cheaper. We'll make adjustments. The field is not going to end, but it's very much there. All I'm saying is one of the things I learned is you've got to recognize things change, move with the times, and this will be another example, and we can talk about all of the others. Excuse me. The last thing I want to talk about is, how do you understand when there are 15 people on a ballot who's going to win? How can you? Who's going to be ahead in the first Democratic poll? Anybody? Who's going to be the leader? How many say Biden? Okay. How many say Bernie Sanders? Okay. How many believe that Joe Biden will be the nominee? No, I don't know. Okay, how many say Bernie Sanders is going to be the nominee? I won't report it back to Bernie. In any respect, let me just say that at the early stage, it's all based on recognition, and somebody may have a core of voters. In 1983, I was working for Walter Mondale. You remember Walter Mondale? Almost president, just missed by a hair. If it had only been Minnesota, he could have been the president of the United States. In any respect, and Walter Mondale asked me early on, he said, everybody in New Hampshire is going to know John Glenn, but they're not going to know these other people. I got to know who's going to be able to come up and do well. And I came up with what's called a hypothetical pairing. And I asked them the peel of each candidate. And I described them in 2 sentences based upon sort of what we knew about them. And Gary Hart was a younger person who stresses that it's time for a new generation of leadership and is known for seeking fresh new solutions to American problems. And then I described Ernest Hollings and Alan Cranston and Reuben Askew. People didn't know Gary Hart at all, and yet just from that 2-line description, you could see he was going to be a person with potential. He ended up winning New Hampshire, coming from nowhere to win it and to be the formidable candidate. And so as we look at the candidates in 2020, the thing that we've learned from the past is don't look at the simple numbers that come out because they're going to mislead you. And what you want to know is what's their simple, direct message and what are they selling to the public? And if you measure that, you're going to have a sense of who can grow and who can get there and who may have very little support, as a Reuben Askew did or whatever else it is. So those are the lessons that essentially came out of this. And they said, look, if you're coming to the Ford Library Institute, you cannot do this without talking about 2020. So I've decided, and I wanted to know, I was very curious. I said, why would they invite me? I said, it just doesn't make any sense. I've been part of the past. I mean, we're talking about the future. It doesn't make any sense. And they said to me, no, it really makes great sense. I said, why? They said, look, the year Duke won the NCAAs, you spoke down there. You spoke at Villanova the week that they won the NCAAs. So, I mean, they don't give a damn what you're saying. They just want a good luck charm. So thank you guys for having me. And I'm sorry I've got so little to say. And, I have to say, if Michigan wins it all, oh my God, my speaking fees are just going to go crazy for 1 week a year. Okay, no, so let me talk about 2020 and what we have here and what's happening. And we're at the very start of all of this, and you've got all these candidates that are out there, people who got great potential, people whose future is in their past. All of this, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. In any respect, so you look at this, I'm going to give you my sense of where I see things and what's there, and then we'll open it up and we'll have a question. And let me start out by saying very simply, and this is something I've learned from my good friend Bob Teeter. The EKG of our business and understanding America is a simple question. Are things in America headed in the right direction or seriously off on the wrong track? And we've been asking this question since 1970, originally created by Elmo Roper, and Burns Roper, I should say. But if you look at where the highs and the lows happen here, it is always a great indicator as how an election is going to turn out. Because if you look at George W. Bush running in 1992, H.W. Bush, despite major accomplishments, America thought things were seriously off on the wrong track. Bill Clinton had an excellent chance, as any Democrat would have had. And if you look at 2008, Barack Obama couldn't miss. I mean, you had 70% of the country saying things were headed on the wrong direction. I mean, no Republican had a chance in terms of that. And you look and you can see the highs and the lows and what goes on during those periods of time. So if you're trying to predict how things are going to go in 2020, watch this. Because at this stage of the game, it's sort of bad news for Donald Trump when 63% say things are headed on the wrong direction. And so those will change. They may get better. As it worked for Obama, while people weren't happy, by the time he got to election, the thing was moving up, and it wasn't so bad. And you have to, oh, I'm sorry, no pictures are allowed. This is no, I'm kidding. Yeah. The guy's going, uh-oh. Yeah. In any respect, so this is the EKG. Second thing is, when we ask voters to tell us in their own words how they feel about the country, take a look. Downhill, disaster, hard times, no compromise, wrong track, all of those things. There are some people, Trump people, who say we're headed in the right direction, that they feel positive, but there are others who are concerned or stagnant, and all of these things. All of these things make up the mood of America, and this is an indication that there are indeed trouble going along. Then you look at the next thing, which is the job rating of the president. And if you look at this, essentially, Donald Trump has done something that no other president has done since polling has began. And that is, he has never had a single hour or a single day where the American public, a majority of the American public, have approved of his performance. No president has ever done that. There have been presidents that are mightily unpopular, et cetera, but he's never had one single day. And you look at this, Democrats have never wavered, or wavered very little, in their attitudes towards him. 5% at the current time approve of his job rating. 85% of Republicans. So if you're a Republican, you've gone through thick and thin with them, and you're with them at this stage of the game. Here's what the problem is for the president. Number one, and that is the overall voters, it's about at 43%. But here's the real problem for the president at this stage of the game. Only 38%, 39% of independents are with them. The country is about 5% more Democratic than it is Republican in terms of voter ID. So if you're going to win, you have to have support from independents. And if the independent support is short of where the overall voters are, you're going to have a hard time getting there. So what's Donald Trump left with? He's got two ways to win this election. Number one, he has to bring in an important third-party candidate, somebody who will gain 4, 6, 8% of the vote, something that allows him to win with less than 50%. Or number two, that the Democrats will nominate somebody that's more unacceptable to the American voters. But you look at that, it's a hard road for the president. But here's another thing to note. Do I get to ask a question of the audience? Sure. Okay. Question. How many of you, for your news, choose CNN? How many of you choose MSNBC? How many of you choose Fox? Can I just make a point? The two people are sitting most close to the exit are the Fox people. Okay, I just happened to notice that. In any respect, when you're watching CNN or you're watching MSNBC, you've got to believe that the President of the United States is about to be kicked out of office in the next 12 hours. Because everything is, oh my God, this is just huge, and it's so important, and it's going to do this or that. And what we did is we took every single major event, from Stone being indicted, to Cohen being indicted, to Flynn pleading guilty, to Mueller's appointment, to firing Comey, et cetera. And if you look, if you're a Democrat, your viewpoint of Donald Trump never changes, okay? If you're a Republican, yes, there was a little blip down in terms of Flynn, but everything else ends up in the 80s. So, you know, when somebody comes blaring in with the most important headline, I can tell you it's not that important. People are not moving around. They're in their silos. The group to look at are independents. Nope, they always stay below 50, and yet it's a pretty short range. So one of the things I want to tell you is not to fall in love with any single event that's happening, because people are siloed at this stage of the game. But and we go back and we look at Bush and we look at Obama, et cetera, in terms of quality of honesty and trust. The President of the United States, from all Americans, 28% rate him as a person of honesty and trust, compared to Obama, compared to Bush, compared to Bush 41, and if we'd had Gerald Ford on there, he would be right up at the top of the list. Being knowledgeable and experienced enough to handle the job, George W. Bush, right after 9/11, people were very supportive. Obama, nearly 50%, Trump at 32%. If they don't like you and they don't trust you and they don't think that, that you have the ability to handle the presidency, you've got a great problem facing you. So we measure all of these various areas as it relates to the President of the United States, and essentially, straightforward, you bet. How many read his tweet this afternoon? How many read his tweet this morning? How many read his tweet last night? How many read his tweet over the weekend? How many? I mean, this guy never stops, you know, and being direct and straightforward, he sets a new record. In terms of changing business in Washington, sure, we've had presidents, but we haven't had anybody like that. But you go to the heart of the things, personal honesty, high ethical standard, being steady and reliable, being experienced enough, all of those are on the negative side, with a majority of Americans saying, he's not good. All of this sets up a situation where Americans say, I don't like this person, I don't trust this person, I don't think he can do the job. So you look, and that tells us where we are at. In terms of their feeling about his relationship with Putin, a little more mixed, but you'll note right after the summit in Helsinki, people were very concerned in terms of yes, he was too friendly. In January of 19, it's dropped back down. If you look again, Republicans not likely to say that's a major problem. That's very much in the background. That is somehow going to play out in the next 12 months. And finally, is a real clue as to 2020 is on the issues. The Republicans have a major problem when it comes to climate change. You look at this, that are they in the mainstream or out of the mainstream? For the Republicans, the number is a minus 34, which means more people, 34% more people say they're out of the mainstream. The Democrats are in the mainstream by a plus 21, a 55-point difference. Healthcare, the differential is 29 points. Two great issues for the Democrats. Abortion, more narrow. Immigration, more narrow. No difference on fiscal issues. So you can see where the Democrats are going to take this campaign. It's going to be much more into climate change and healthcare, and that, again, what's the issue that works for the Republican? So let's stop right here. I promised you a rose garden, haven't I? Have I promised you a rose garden?
Yes.
Okay, you're wrong. I haven't promised you. I didn't promise you a rose garden, did I? I just told you Donald Trump's in trouble, right? How many people think he can be reelected? Look at all you people. You heretics. You know, am I to root for Michigan in the NCAAs? Okay. What I'm trying to tell you is you can look at data and it can say to you, clearly this is going to happen. But you have to look at all the data to really understand this election. We're very early on, and the first place to start is the economy. An issue that we have asked over a long period of time. The economy moves more voters than anything else, and what we find here is Americans don't think there's going to be a recession in the next 12 months. Doesn't mean that they are predictors of where things are at, but their feeling about the economy psychologically says, I feel good, I feel positive, and you look at this and you say, what could be a better sign for an incumbent president? If you have a strong economy going for you, you can make mistakes. You can do things incorrectly. Why? Because people say, boy, I'm mad at him on this. Boy, I think he's handled Russia the wrong way. Why are we doing this with North Korea? But they come back and they say, hey, I got my job, and my 401k is better. And they say, I think I'll stick with them. I got problems with them. Second thing is, what's the likelihood that they will vote for Trump? And we've asked this question going all the way back to Bill Clinton 20 plus years ago, going at the same time as we ask, looking at the same time. And what does it say to you? 41% of the voters tell us that they are either very likely, definitely going to vote for him, or probably going to vote for him. And 48% say they aren't. I picked on you twice. I wouldn't do that a third time. Good news or bad news for Trump? 41% say, I'm very likely or somewhat likely to vote for him. You didn't think you were coming here for a free seat. Good news or bad news?
I don't think that would be bad news because 48% may vote for somebody else.
Right, so that's not a good way to start, right? How many say bad news? How many say it's good news? It would be bad news if it were not for two factors. Number one, look where he stood in December of 17. Okay, 52%. That's 48% better. But then, let's go back to Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton wasn't in such good shape. Essentially, difference between 41 and 38 is not that much difference. How did Bill Clinton do in 1996? He won re-election, and he won it easily with 49%. So you got to look at this and say, ooh, let's be a little bit cautious from just looking at Donald Trump. It may not be good, but it may not be as bad as everybody else thinks. And we've looked at it by Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. And again, the problem facing the president is independence. And you look, for Bill Clinton, essentially, you had a positive number there, 39 on the vote for the incumbent, 22%. So the president, President Trump faces a more difficult challenge. How do people feel about capitalism? How about you guys? How many are positive on capitalism? Why aren't you positive on? No, I won't pick on you. Okay, 50% of the American public have a positive view about capitalism. 24% have a negative viewpoint. If you're a Democrat, you're more split. If you're a Republican, you're overwhelmingly favored. How do people feel about socialism? Oh, sure, you're up there with the hands for socialism. Yeah, kid's never earned a dime in his life. He's, count on me, I'm on socialism. You might want to turn around and look at those people who have been earning money for a lifetime. Yeah, guy's on full scholarship. Okay. This guy's my ride home. I don't think.
She's the ride home.
Yeah. Okay. The point here is, why would I show you this chart? What's Donald Trump going to run on? Capitalism. He's going to run on socialism. And he is going to pour it on against the Democrats. And every candidate is going to become known as AOC Biden, AOC Sanders, AOC Gillibrand, whoever it is, that's where they're going to go. So don't think that just because the Democrats may have trouble on Donald Trump has something. He knows where he's going to take this election. Next point. We asked in the last month's poll, in selecting a nominee for president for the Democratic Party, we asked Democrats, which of the following is more important? A candidate with the best chance to defeat Trump or a candidate who comes closest to your view? By a margin of 57 to 39, the voters say, a candidate who is closest to my point of view. So if you think somehow Democrats have found a new elixir and it's going to be kumbaya time, it's not going to be. I mean, they're going to be out there and chopping one another up, moving further left, trying to get the left wing of the Democratic Party. And essentially, when you look at people who are under the age of 40, by a margin of 65 to 32, 2-1, they say, give me somebody who I agree with. Now, that doesn't mean they won't vote against Trump, but it does tell you that what's coming for the Democrats is going to be a very spirited fight, and that spirited fight is going to create a split within the Democratic Party. Again, you look at this and it tells you Democrats may have an excellent target at 2020, but at the same time, they have to get through the primary. And finally, do you want someone who is proposing larger scale policies that cost more and might be harder to pass into law, but will bring major change, or somebody who proposes smaller scale policies, cost less, that might be easier to pass into law, but will bring less change? You look at Democratic primary voters, there again, what do they want? They want big change. Are they wrong? May not be, but you can see what happens. You saw what they did when it was George McGovern who said, you know, we've got to give everybody $2,000 or whatever the number that they were giving away at that stage of the game, or we're going to raise your taxes. He won't tell you. Mondale told the Democratic convention. This primary season is going to push people towards the extreme, towards the left. Those two last charts are things that Democrats are going to have to deal with in order to get a candidate that is then going to be able to win the primary and come back to the general election. So the last thing I want to leave you with, which is where the American public is on the whole Russian investigation and everything that's gone here. And basically what I would tell you is, while everybody says, boy, this thing's changing attitudes, these things, reports from Mueller, the things that you hear, the answer is the American public hasn't started to engage in this. They are nowhere. They are nowhere on the issue of impeachment. They're nowhere on the Mueller report, et cetera. And so they say, no, he's dishonest, but those figures really basically haven't changed over the course of the last 6 months. And there is going to be a moment, as always happened, where either the voters see something and say, I've become skeptical, I've turned against the president, I've got a problem here, or just the opposite. I've heard all of this, and I'll tell you, I don't think there's anything there. They may have something against Manafort, they may have something against Roger Stone, they may have something against this person or that person, but the president is free and clear. I can't tell you how it plays out. All I can tell you is they haven't arrived at that point. So here we are, 600 days away from the 2020 presidential election. We are so far away. What I would tell you is, don't overjump it. Don't look at it and think by March we'll know what's going to happen, or July, that event is the most important. What we know is what the American public cares about, what's important to them, and we know what they're looking for. As we judge this election, it's really judging against those kinds of measures. And I think at the heart of all of this is it's a country that would like to be able to settle down. The feeling is there's too much chaos, there's too much happening, and there's not enough sense of coming together, and we are in our silos. There will be somebody who starts to find a way to weave us together. If there's that person has a very good chance. On the other hand, if we end up in our silos, it could be very much 8 years for Donald Trump. So you look, and what I'm telling you is polling is great. It can help you, but really what you want to look at are not the numbers, but the ideas and the thoughts of how people make their decisions. So with that, I thank you very much, and we'll answer some questions. Okay. The first question I heard was, do you guarantee that Michigan is going to win the NCAAs? Okay. Questions, thoughts? Go for it.
Well, thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it. A couple of things. First of all, with most polls, including the one that you gave about what political or what news media you watch, your poll was, I guess, incomplete or biased because I don't watch this one or that one. I watch or listen to both, for example, in my car, I'll bounce between talk radio and NPR. So I'll listen to both sides just to get a more balanced approach. The question I wanted to ask you was, I heard all the polls 2 years ago saying Hillary's ahead, Hillary's ahead. And I was suspicious because in past elections, I would see Obama-Biden bumper stickers everywhere around Ann Arbor, especially, even after the election was over, or Kerry Edwards for 2 years. But that year, I didn't see any Hillary ones. They were scarce. But then if I drove north of here in the next county for work and I got off the main highway, I saw Trump signs everywhere. And I thought, the media's or the polls, there's something wrong.
And so right you were. In fact, I'm not sure why we're getting the feedback, but essentially, I had that same report come to me from Pennsylvania. I had a friend who had gone to the middle of Pennsylvania to do a special project. And as he drove back to the Pittsburgh airport through the middle of Pennsylvania, he said, it is littered with Trump. And essentially, I think that we underrepresented and underappreciated the Trump vote. We certainly had Hillary Clinton's problems, and we could see in terms of feelings towards her, those were negative. But I don't think we ever had the full sense of things. I was mentioning something at dinner. I do a lot of focus groups. And focus groups are a dozen people around a table, and I talk to them. And I try and get underneath what's happening in the numbers. And I asked an interesting question in 2016. And I said, let us suppose that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are in the 5th grade, 11 years old, whatever it is, 12 years old, and they're down on a playground. And you're up above, looking down on that playground. How would you be able to pick out Donald Trump from everybody else on the playground? And how would you be able to pick out Hillary Clinton from every other 5th grader? They discussed Donald Trump. They said he would be on the jungle gyms going, hey, I'm the head of the thing. He would be the guy who would be selling candy to the other kids. And third, he would be bullying up on the 4th grader, okay? Not a very pleasant picture. And then I said, who would Hillary Clinton be? She would be the little girl all on her own reading a book, or she would be the tattletale. And I said, oops, you got trouble if you're the tattletale. And essentially, it's understanding those kinds of things that led me to believe early on that Hillary Clinton had major problems. In fact, I wrote an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal the week that she went for the nomination, the convention week, explaining those exact things. So you feel it by looking at signs, and that tells you intensity and how much people care. I try and do it by small groups. But the indications were there. As I said, we missed the signs. At least I'll take responsibility.
But
Thank
what
you.
it doesn't include is likely voters.
Well, certainly likely voters is what we get when we do our survey, because we ferret out people who are less likely. Yes.
Let me make one quick comment of agreement with you that as a fellow Democrat, I am very concerned that our party is trying to recreate the McGovern coalition. And
It won't be easy, but don't count us out.
It will be easy. Take reparations. We're all for reparations, and it'll do well in the primaries and sink us in the general. I was very interested, though, and I want to ask you about this, the climate change, the overwhelming support for the Democratic position on climate change. That would be great. It's a terribly important issue with me, but is it at all comparably salient with the average voter?
Well, certainly compared to the economy and to questions related to war and peace, et cetera, immigration, it is not as important. But what is fascinating is how much more important it has become over the past 3-4 years. People are seeing it, they're saying to themselves, we've got to be able to do something. And here, the Democrats, much like 2018 with healthcare, have a major advantage. And by having a major advantage, I believe that Donald Trump has put himself in a position that is so out of step with the American public that if you worry about reparations on one front, I would tell you he has to worry about climate change, because everything he's done within his administration has been essentially to hurt the environment and to create the problems we have. Yes.
So with 2020 coming up and after the 2016 polls, do you think that people will be hesitant to believing what is happening in the 2020 polls?
God, she seems so nice. She arrived at that microphone with the sweetest smile I've ever seen. I said, what beification there is. Yeah, fair question. And that is, no. Because there is something that sort of, people just get sucked into looking at polls. They give them too much weight, too much attention, and they don't look at the really important parts of a poll. They always look at the head-to-head, and they think that somehow you're predicting the future. What you're doing is reflecting where opinion is at the time. I think the polls will be very helpful in 2020 if you look at the bigger picture and understand the things that we will be understanding. Will they be more skeptical? Probably, because what you will see is if Donald Trump's behind, he'll say false polls, fake polls. Remember how I was doing in 2016? And other people will say they don't reflect such and such. So yeah, it goes with the territory, but the biggest problem is it's not that people look at the head-to-head, they don't look at all the other elements. It goes with the territory.
So Peter, you've given us again all the data on the popular vote distribution, but it should be not that difficult, even if the density of polling is limited, to have state by state or region by region adjustment and actually estimate how these opinions will turn into electoral votes.
Yeah.
Do you do that?
Here's the problem. Everybody said, you know, look, the polls got it wrong. Why don't you guys do the Electoral College and do it that way? As a pollster, we couldn't be happier to do that. If we could get the NBC and Wall Street Journal to pay us for doing 500 interviews in each of 50 states, oh my God, you could be on my Learjet in no time at all. But the fact of the matter is, they only want to pay so much money. They don't want to do this. And there are other ways you could do it. You could say, well, we'll only look at certain states, which are the swing states, and do that. But to be perfectly honest, NBC and Wall Street Journal is a national poll. We're not trying to predict the election. If you want to look and see what's happening in the key states, look at the polls that are done in the key states. NBC, we do not do them, but they do some polls only in the key states like Michigan and Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, et cetera. To me, the more important thing is what's the national mood and what's the dynamic. I don't think we'll change in what we do. How people will read the polls is always going to be a problem because they'll look at the numbers that are less important and ignore the more important. But then our job is to explain that and to help voters to understand what's there. But if you can get the Wall Street Journal to pay for that, you can have the first ride on the Learjet.
Just one quick request and then a question.
Sure.
Since you work with NBC, could you try to get to those talking heads on MSNBC and explain that polling shouldn't be emphasized as much as it is? Because I think we all react to what they're making a certainty, and I don't think it's certain at all. But my question is, I notice a big shift in the parties, and I'm wondering if there's truth to that. How would you talk about the Democratic Party today? Who identifies with the party and who identifies with the Republican Party? Because it feels different to me than maybe 5 years ago.
Well, thank you for your suggestion. Naturally, I won't pass it on because if you bite the hand that feeds you, you don't have a hand. In any respect, in terms of the perceptions of the party, yeah, they continue to change, and perceptions that the Democrats are more liberal, less moderate than they were. Republicans are seen as more conservative than they used to be. So you're getting into the silos and then you're getting into ideology. In terms of how people view the parties on issues, they're pretty much the same. That the Republicans have always been stronger in terms of foreign policy, have always been stronger on national defense, always been stronger on crime issues of those nature. Democrats have always been stronger on areas of human rights, on the area of environment, et cetera. And again, you see that spreading out. The one thing that has changed, and it tends to be the one to watch, is who's best on the economy. And interestingly enough, the Democrats had an edge in the 2012, 2013, and 14 period, but by the time we got to 15 and 16, it switched over to the Republican Party, and they still are seen as best in terms of the economy.
So you mentioned earlier that a lot of polling is now being done online and kind of different methods. Have there been new polling methodologies or changes to get rid of some of the biases that come with that? Or is it about the same as before?
It's a great question that I was hoping you wouldn't ask. I am not the best person to speak on methodology. That's not, let's say, my strongest suit. But what I will tell you is that the challenge facing online polling is how do you draw an accurate cross-section of the country? In other words, you have to have something that allows, quote, every voter an equal chance with every other voters. And obviously when you went door to door, people only had one house, so the chance of overcounting people were not that great. Telephone, obviously we've adapted as people have gone to cell phones. 50% of our interviews are now done on cell phone. 5 years ago, we probably did 5% or whatever. So we've adapted in that way. In terms of online, yes, there are panels, there are ways in which they've refined it. I don't understand it completely enough, but the challenge, I believe, is that it is so much harder to be able to be sure that you've got an accurate cross-section. Now, my partner, Jeff Guerin, who is one of the best pollsters, has said, you know, it all comes down to weighting. And if you weight these things correctly, you can end up with a acceptable sample. I know that one way or another, this business is going to end up there. How they clean up the methodology, I'm not sure, but it certainly suggests that weighting will be a huge part of it. And by the way, when I say weighting, that means if you get 56% women, you weight that back down to what we know in the voting population. Or you get so many younger people, you have to weight them down and weight up the elderly. So that's my best answer for you, but don't ever come to my lecture again.
I was wondering if polling numbers affect like people's attitude toward voting. So like if Hillary was up by like 6 percentage points, would people be like, oh, well then I don't need to go vote?
Yeah, I've been asked that question since about 1964. And everything that I have looked at always says to me that the person who is behind tends to do better in the final count than the person ahead. And so you go over the years, and whether it's a landslide where George McGovern loses or a very close election with Gore and Bush, my tendency is to tell you that, quote, the underdog usually does better. And everybody always figured there's a winner bias. I don't think that's true. And again, it's hard to know how people change their minds and what they do. But of all the sort of concerns and criticisms, that's the one that is not high on my list.
Thank you. I'm wondering about the Democratic primary, and the question I have is, how do you do polling in a situation like that where you have huge numbers of candidates, not too much money, and not too much distance between the candidates?
I spent 2 hours on the phone with Chuck Todd of NBC and with Jerry Seib of the Wall Street Journal and Bill McIntyre, my Republican partner. And we talked about that for 2 hours. And it is one of the most vexing and difficult problems that we face. When you have 16 people that could be announced, you can't read people's 16 names and expect them to hold it in their head as to who they want to vote for, et cetera, because there's always going to be a bias towards the most recognized name, et cetera. We are in the process, and I won't discuss exactly what we're doing, but we're coming up with a new methodology, hopefully to understand who has potential, who doesn't have as much growth. And we're not trying to pair them against one another. We're going to look at them individually and provide that. People always want a horse race. We're saying we're not going to get into that at this stage of the game. Instead, we're going to give you a sense of where people stand, who may be in the top rung and who may be in the bottom rung. Because there is no national primary, and so all we're doing is providing an insight and hopefully telling you, maybe among the young people, they're all moving in such and such direction. Maybe among liberal Democrats, they're moving. That's how we're trying to deal with it. There isn't an easy answer.
Yes, there are two issues that you didn't raise here. One of them is abortion and the other is gun control. And there's been a real dye thrown into the mix here by what happened in New Zealand a few days ago. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that they have a female head of state. And I wonder whether women now, since the appellation Crooked Hillary was used, women are running into a glass ceiling with respect to the presidency in the United States, and whether the prospect of a woman being the candidate on the Democrat side the next time is going to be influenced by that.
Excellent questions and important questions. I spent 20 years of my life working on the issue of gun violence and gun control. It is the biggest professional failure of my life. And when I say the biggest professional failure, because I'm in favor of responsible gun control. And essentially, for 21 years between about 1979 and 2000, everything moved in one direction. It has been fascinating in the last 2 years. Public opinion has started to move in the different direction. And you can see it in terms of the polls, but you can also see it in terms of the actions by the NRA. And I'm not saying we're turning everything around. I'm just saying that the American public has looked at the violence, and I think the violence in all the schools with young people have moved people very directly. I don't know where it leads this country or what it means, but it is not in the same place it was 15 years ago. On the issue of abortion, we've been fascinated in one set of results that we got recently, and essentially, we see much more division on the opinion on abortion than we saw before. And when I say division, not more people moving pro-choice. It is essentially the country is much more divided than they may have been, and that's exceptionally important. And I think it will have a role in 2020. I'm not sure how it will play. And you had one final point.
Whether women are hitting a glass ceiling.
No. Are women hitting a glass ceiling? Hillary Clinton hit a glass ceiling. And I think it had to do essentially with her personality and how people reacted to her. I honestly believe that a woman becoming president, that is no longer a glass ceiling. And I worked for a woman who became the first governor of a state, and it was a state on her own right, state of Connecticut, and her name was Ella Grasso. And I did a lot of polling to find out what the bias was. And the bias in 1973, she ran in 74, was women over the age of 50 who felt that men would not respect a woman because men didn't respect her, or didn't respect them. And that element has changed tremendously. And you can see it across the country, and I think the Me Too movement will be one of the most important movements that we will see over this decade. And my feeling is there a glass ceiling on women? No. And I think one of the things that we haven't tested is what is the bias? And I think the bias for a woman has to be able that she can prove her credentials on national defense. But I think without that, almost everything else works in the woman's favor. So my sense is maybe 2020, maybe 2024, but we're certainly going to elect a woman president very soon. Okay, where was the applause from the women? Okay, have we covered the world? We have. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.
We want to thank Peter for coming, and I want to thank Patrick and Albion College for sending not only the eminent professor and our guest and our wonderful students. Come back again. This is a friendly audience. But this was a lot of fun, and I'd love to have you speak at the museum, and especially as we go toward the 2020 election. This was really, really fascinating. For you, sir, out of respect for your wonderful treatment of Gerald Ford, we have a set of pens for you with President Ford's signature on them so that you can sign all of your polling predictions with those.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm filling out my NCAA bracket. Thank you very much. Thank you.